The first issue at hand that led to cause World War II is arguably World War I. World War I peace treaty was more treaty than peace treaty. It's called the Treaty of Versailles, and it's now considered to be one of the more notorious treaties in which the winners, the victors of World War I, determined the peace, the conditions for peace, and required the losers to sign it. One of the biggest losers at the time, well, Austro-Hungarian Empire no longer existed after World War I, neither did the Ottoman Empire. So most of the fault for World War I fell in the lap of Germany. Germany was just ascribed all of the war guilt for World War I. Specifically, the Treaty of Versailles stated that Germany lost the territory that it had always kind of desired and fought over with France, the Alsace-Lorraine. It also was told that it could not have a standing army. I think it was allowed maybe 100,000 troops to remain, just basics. But in no way could it have an army that was powerful enough or strong enough to be able to militarize again. This is probably one of the harshest components of the Treaty of Versailles. It required Germany to pay $33 billion to France and Great Britain. That's $33 billion in World War I value to France and Great Britain to help them rebuild their territory after war. These reparations were so great that Germany silently or quietly finished paying the World War I reparations to France and Germany in October of 2010. The fourth component is that all of the area that was industrial on the border of France and Germany would actually be allowed to be occupied by France. This was pretty hard for Germany because not only now were they the losers of war and their economy really had been destroyed, but now the way in which they could build their economy again through their industry was now going to be controlled by France. So they didn't have a strong way in which they could build up their economic market again. The second reason for, and I would like to go back and say, many argue that it was the Treaty of Versailles that left Germany in an economic desperation. Being required to pay war reparations, not having industry, an industrial area in which it could build back its markets, and there was the Great Depression that occurred between the World War I and World War II that affected everybody in the world. Germany had relied on some loans from the United States to stay afloat after World War I and to be able to pay back the reparations to France and Germany. After the Great Depression hit, the U.S. had to stop giving those loans, and as a result, Germany went into a great economic depression. Many say that it's this economic depression that allowed for the rise of the Nazism in Germany. Nazism had been around in the 1920s and into the 1930s, and it wasn't until the economic depression really hit Germany that you start to see more and more people take hold and listen to this charismatic leader that's saying that he alone can make his country great again. Totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is a form of government in which there is a strong consolidated power that reaches not just into the citizens' civil and political lives, but also their social, economic, and cultural lives as well. Total control over a system. And you start to see this as a way in which governments started consolidating power after World War I, and many say it was after the economic depression of the Great Depression affected many worldwide. As I mentioned, Nazism started to rise in Germany during this time, and you saw a charismatic leader in Hitler who was promising the German people that it was not their fault for being in their economic desperate situation, but instead the fault of the victors of World War I, as well as the scapegoat of the Jewish people within Germany and others. You see in Italy, Mussolini did the same. Now, Mussolini chose a fascism, which is a very difficult term to define, but a fascistic government is one in which it explains that a bit of nationalism with a negative connotation. We are more superior than others, and that if we can have more control, if you allow me to have more control over our government and consolidate power, less democratic, letting everybody have a say, then I will lead us to greatness again, and we can be great over others in the future. In Japan, you saw an increase in militarism. Japan had long since had a noble military culture, and then during the late 1800s and 1900s, it became an industrial power under the Meiji Restoration. And you start to see it develop into kind of a more appreciation of their military and their naval power. There was no one leader in Japan that really rose to the top, but instead it was the military that took control. And during the economic depression, there's nothing worse than being an island that has to import and import goods it needs from the world during an economic world depression. Japan started suffering greatly during this time, and the military took control, suspended the constitution, and said that it would make Japan great again if it could gain more control over all aspects of the government. And finally, in Russia, you have Stalin. Stalin took control of the, so a little confusingly, before World War I, Russia was called Russia, the Russian Empire. During World War I in 1917, there was a communist takeover of Russia called the Bolshevik Revolution. And out of that grew people who believed that communism was the future of Russia, and in turn changed the name of Russia to the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire to the Soviet Union. And Stalin became the leader of this communist regime. And so you start to see after World War I, Stalin rising and consolidating power more and more throughout Russia. So during this time, it's more aptly called the Soviet Union. Expansionism. With this totalitarianism and this desire for greatness, many found that the way to get out of the economic trouble they were in was to expand their territory. It would allow them to gain more natural resources and to show off their military, which would expand their economy, as they had to fuel to build tanks, to hire soldiers, etc. So many said that war was going to be what was going to get them out of an economic desperate situation of the World Great Depression. In Germany, you see them that Hitler ignores the Treaty of Versailles and starts to militarize again. He first then expands into the Alsace-Lorraine, that territory that's always under dispute between France and Germany. When he successfully did this, he then expanded into Czechoslovakia, and this is a time that the Western powers, Great Britain and France specifically, got concerned, and Great Britain met with Hitler and said, okay, if you can have Czechoslovakia. No Czechoslovakian leaders were asked to attend this Munich agreement. It's called the policy of appeasement, appeasing Hitler, and they said, as long as you don't go any farther. Well, now Hitler had expanded into France, into Czechoslovakia, and found himself emboldened to expand into Poland. It was at this time that the Western powers realized that Hitler was not going to stop, but must be stopped. You saw Italy. Mussolini decided to expand in North Africa to gain more colonies than it had. Japan began to expand into the South China Sea, and into China at this point was a pretty weakened state, and so it decided to go into the Korean Peninsula, which had been taken care of by China, and into mainland China, into the area of Manchuria, as well as into the South China Sea, and claim many of the islands that are still under dispute today. Russia made an agreement with an expansionist Germany, saying, well, you can expand into the western part of Poland, and we'll expand into eastern Poland, or Poland. All right, so you have on the Axis powers, Germany, expansionist Germany, expansionist Italy and expansionist Japan. Interestingly, originally the Soviet Union, the USSR, made an alliance with Germany and said, as long as you don't expand into my territory, we're fine. You can take Western Poland, I'll take Eastern Poland, and we'll make an agreement. But Germany got so emboldened that at some time it decided it was going to also expand into the Soviet Union. And so as a result, the Soviet Union joined forces with the opposite team. It moved over to the Ally side, made of Britain, France, and later the United States. As a result, it's important to remember that the Soviet Union and the United States ended up on the same side in World War II, but almost by accident because they had a common enemy. And so as soon as World War II was over, many of the differences between these two states, one expansionist totalitarian regime and another democratic state, there were several issues at the core that they couldn't overcome. So as soon as World War II was over, you start to see the cooling of friendship between the U.S. and USSR, and as a result, the onset of the Cold War.